This is Gemara Metziah, Daf Samoch Gimel, and we're holding on the bottom of Samoch Beis Amid Beis as we are trying to figure out what is the case in the Mishnah. Now, actually, I have to apologize because we're in the middle of a Bayis Pshat in which we're now Rava's asking numerous kashas, and Rava is going to have his own shot on the bottom of the Amid. So I apologize because in reality we should have finished at least Abaye because it is a little bit confusing to jump in the middle of the Sugya, but let's try to do our best. We saw in the middle of the Amid, Ella Amar Abaye. Masnisan Kiditani of Safra. So just to look up for a moment, smack in the middle of the Amid, just to understand that we're discussing the case of Dvei Rachia, which is what? The way that Abaye learned the case of the Mishnah was a form of haramas ribis. It was not real ribis, but rather it was something, whether it's a mechsi, whether it's a bit of ribis. What was the case? Halveni mana amrle mana in lichitim mana yeshli. So really everything is good and dandy, and you wanted to buy it back at a lower price. Why? Because he needed the cash right now. You're not allowed to do it. Asr lasais. Okay, and this is the Tani of Safra. Actually, this is the Dvei Rav Chia. Haramas ribis. So now going back to where we're up to, Amrle Rava. Rava asks 10 lines from the bottom. The first one on line is Kiribis. Amrle Rava Vayachi Tanli Chitim. Why does they give me my weed? It should rather say Demei Chitimi Bayale. Answers the Gemara. Tani Demei Chiti. That's what it should have said. Shani Meicher Lecha. That I am Shani, Meichron. Shemachartin Lachmi Bayale. That's which I sold you, it should have said. Tani Shemachartin Lach. This is what it originally was worth as well. This is what it means to say. And after all these questions, Rava comes up with his pshat. So the truth is, most of them Abaye was able to deflect, change some of the terminology of the Mishnah, but comes along Rava on the last line of Samach Beis Mebeis Elam Rava Kishachivna Rava Ishia. When I will Kishachivna, says Rava, when I will be niftar, Rava Ishia Nafik Lavasi. Rava Ishia will come out from Shemayim to greet me. Why will Rava Ishia come out to greet me? Says Rava. As we turn over to the top of Samach Gimel and Aleph, the reason being is because I explained the way, like Rav Ishia, that is how I explained the Mishnah, says Rava. Titani Rav Ishia, so lent his friend on Giles and he went to meet him at the green. He asked him back for his money. Shani writes a likach vem chitin. I want to buy wheat from the chitin yeshli. Shani noisin lachai, I have wheat to give you. Seva son like a shachalachshav. He gives man chitin limkar amar like ten chitin. He says, okay, you said you're going to give me the wheat. I want to sell that wheat. Please give me my wheat. Shani writes lemachra velikach vem yayin. You know why I want to sell the wheat? He tells, because I want to buy with it wine. I don't really care for the wheat. You know, we're holding here, well, this stuff is the day after Pesach, but we're holding here an Erev Pesach, well, 2 days before, and maybe he wants to sell the wheat because it's going to be Pesach, and he wants to buy wine. Amar Lo, he says, why bother? Yayin yeshli yayin, I have wine, shani nice l'cha, save us on kishar shalachsav. He gives man yayin limkar. This guy says, okay, thank you so much that you transfer it over to wine, but guess what, now I want to sell the wine. Shani writes Lamachrai, Shaman. So he says to him, he says to him, Tanli Yaini. Shani writes Lamachrai, Shaman. Amar Lai, Shaman Yeshli, Shani. He says, no, why bother? I have oil that I'll give you. Save us like Yeshar Shalachshav. And he further transfers the loan. Kulam, in all these cases, Yeshlai Mutter. ein loy aser. So a fascinating brisa the Rav Oishia allows to continuously transfer over the halva from one item to the next. As we look back in the second line, how did the case begin? The case began, someone lent his friend a mana. So he lent his friend a mana, and now we're dealing with the mana. And instead of paying back the mana, the Leiva is continuously pushing off the halva onto different items. Continues the Gemara, Umay Lokach. So what do the Mishnah means? That's how Rav Oishia learned. So says the Gemara on Rava, if this is Pshat in the Mishnah, Umay Lokach, Lokach Vavasai. It means he bought it for the debt that he owes to him, meaning it wasn't a real lekicha, but rather he bought it based on the money that was owed. Says the Gemara, oh my Rav. So this is how Rav said, when I go to Shemayim, Rav Oishia is going to greet me as I'm explaining according to him. That's the price of Rav Oishia, that's how it can fit into the Mishnah. Based upon this, Amar Rav Shmaminam de Rav Oishia Talas, we learn from Rav Oishia 3 dinim. Number one, Shmaminam de Malva Gabe Peiros. Number one, we learn that you let it convert, transfer a halva, cash, onto an amount of produce. And we do not say, and we do not say that it's not like the money came to his hands. The opposite, we allow him to transfer and view it as if he got paid. Number two, that this whole story only begins if he has the item that you're transferring it over onto. Number three, that Rav Oishia Rava holds a Rav Yanai, Dam Rav Yani, Mali Hein, Mali Demeyan. Excuse me, Rav Yanai said, what's the difference in the item themselves? What's the difference in the value? You owe me $100. I don't care. You give me the cash. I don't care. You give me apples, give me oranges, whatever I need. What is the difference? Deitmar. So says the Gemara on this third and final limud from Rav Oishia, Rav Amar, Oisad Amana Bepeiros, Veisad Amana Bedamin. Rav Yanai Amar Mali Hein, Mali Demeyan. Rav says that you're allowed to make a amana. You're allowed to say that you're going to pay back at a future date, says Rav, on payrois, but you're not allowed to make it. You're not allowed to utilize this future payment on damin. Whereas Rav Yanai says you can do it for either. So let's take a moment to look at Rashi. Rashi on the third medium-sized line, no sin amana bepeiros. Nois din mois be'amana kishar shalachshav sheyotze b'shok. Amanas kalberes avilu yakira chitin. Even if the value goes up, you pay prior, and you're going to get the item later. However, if Enois and Amana continues Rav, listen, Alaperes get a couple damim to get cash, to give the Zuzi Yavi, the Zuzi Shakel. Merci, Kirabisa. You're not allowed to do such with cash, because I'll give you $100, and you can give me back whatever the cash of a certain item is worth at a later date. The value could change. Therefore, it's a merci, it looks like ribis. Rav Yanai said in both cases it is allowed. Meisvei asked the Gemara, Kasha on Rav. Kulam imiyeshlai mutter. We said in all these cases we have it's mutter. So l'chayra, not like Rav that said that you can't transfer it over. Amar Rav Una, Amar Rav v'im shem mashach. It's only if you did a real Mashicha, that you did a Kinyan, that's when the Bryce was talking about it's allowed. Even Shem mashach sheich l'meimar, then of course it's yours. Okay, going sheich l'karen zavis, that he designated a corner for that, meaning he didn't really take the items, and therefore that still is the chiddush that such a halva and such a methodology of paying back is going to be allowed. Continues the Gemara, Shmuel Amar, and Shmuel says, Hamani Rav Yehudi. Says Shmuel, who is the Bryce? The Bryce like Rav Yehuda, the Amar, Tarecha beribis mutter. Says Rav Yehuda, one-sided ribis is going to be mutter, and therefore the brisa is only going to be allowed to swap the item for something else is only when it's going to be tzad echad, only one-sided ribis, and not when it goes both ways. Tanya, and that's going to be the sheet of the brisa as we learned in the brisa. So again, we're quoting a case to prove this klal that we just said, that tzad echad beribis is going to be mutter. With such a proof, we're then going to go further. We're going to go further into how it works in such a case. Someone owes his friend a mana, and he made the field into a mecher, that instead of paying him cash, he says, what happens if I don't have cash by such and such date? You're going to collect from the field. But the field was put up for a payment retroactive to the original date of the halva. If he pays, all's good and dandy. If he doesn't pay, then the field is considered collected. Mutter. If the seller takes the payros in the interim, everything is fine. The buyer takes the payros, you have a problem. Because how can you say that eventually it's going to be your field, limafreya, retroactive, back to the original date, and I'm sitting there eating the produce? Rav Yehuda Imer Chidish. It is still mutter. Says Rav Yehuda, Amrli Rav Yehuda, Ma'isa be'Ba'isa shazunim, Shasas adei Amecha Abi Rav Elazar ben Azar v'Lokech Oichal Beiros, and the Lokech Lamaisa was the one eating the produce. Haya Lokech Beiros Haya. Amrli Misham Raya, what's your Raya? Moichal Beiros Haya. What's the Lokech? Was the Moichal Lokech? My beinayu, Amar Abaya Sarecha Beribis Iga beinayu. The difference is, says Abaya, that when it's a one-sided ribis, this is going to be the case. The Rav Yehuda allows it. That's the reason why the loikeach is allowed to keep the produce, because it's not necessarily going to be ribis. Sarecha beribis is any scenario that if you play one card, it ends up with the ribis. You play the other, it's not. So if he ends up paying back with cash, there's no ribis. If he ends up defaulting, thereby the field becoming the collection, it's yes ribis. Sarecha beribis is mutter. Rava Amar. Says Rava, no, you know the machlokes of Yudacham is ribis hamanas la'achzir yikmeinayu. Another fundamental idea. What if you give ribis with the intent almanas that you're going to return it? In such a case, Chachamim still hold it's aser, whereas this is where Rav Yehuda is going to be mekel. Amar Rava Hashad Amar Rav Yanai. Now that Rav Yanai has said, as we turn over to Samach Gimel Amar Aleph, what was the root statement of Rav Yanai? Mali hein, Mali Timeyan. Said Rav Yanai that there's no difference between the items themselves, no difference between their value. Mali hein, Mali Timeyan, Amrinan, Mali Timeyan, Mali hein, Nami Amrinan. So we say it the other way as well. And then you're able to stipulate on the current market value, even if you don't actually have that produce. So they asked on Rava Kulam Motor. What did the Mishnah say explicitly? Im Yeshlai Motor, which clearly implies a Mein Lo Yaser. So how can you tell me I feel Mein Lo it's Motor Amar Leho? The reason is Hasam Alva Hacham Zvini. There in the case of the price of Rav Aisha, we're talking about a case of Alva with no actual cash went from hand to hand, whereas by us it's talking about a Zvini, it's talking about a sale. Continues the Gemara, Rabbi Rav Yosef Dami Tervayo Mai Taima. What is the reason? Amr Rabbanan, the Rabbanan said, Baiskin al Shar Shabashok. They could stipulate on the current market value. Because the buyer can say, take your favor and throw it onto the thorns. Maya Hanis Li, what are you benefiting to me by giving me items more than I paid? If I would have had money, if I would have kept the money and not have given it to you, I would have bought the goods in a different place, and I would have got the profit either way. So therefore, the fact that he's giving a product, a produce, a beiri that is worth more than the original, l'chayra, shouldn't be ribis, because the lekech could say, if I would have had my cash, I would be able to do this also. But I didn't. You had my cash, so you're not really benefiting me anything. Amrei Abai the Rav Yosef Elameata Batalava Sabasam Misham Tomatia Mashil to Zech Vashadech Ezri Amrei Chiti Dikat Riba Kalboy. He says, I don't understand. I should be able to lend you a saw, get back a saw. It might be worth more due to the market value. What's the difference? If it would have had my own saw, if I would have had my own wheat, I would have left it and it would not have gotten ruined. So therefore, the fact that it increased the value doesn't get me anything. So it should be the same thing. You should be able to claim that he's allowed to do it because there's no inherent gain. Hasam halva hachazvini. No, fundamental difference. If it's a real halva, it doesn't start. It's a zvini. We're just worried what it's going to look like. That's a different story. I'm there. You have to give money to the broker to make the deal start. So there is some sort of fees that are played up front. He responds, person's money are the same thing that he himself invested in the item, therefore he himself wants to make sure that there are no issues. Continues the Gemara, the two dots smack in middle of Samal Kiblam and Beis, Rabbi Rav Yosef Dami Tarvayu. Hi man, this guy, the Yov's using Atara Charifa, that he paid for an early price of the produce. He has to show up at the threshing floor to inspect and confirm that his sale is indeed valid. Lamai, what exactly does that mean? Why is he showing up Lebeidari? For what reason? Ilemikna, if it's to acquire, Haloikani, Ilikabula, and if it's to make the sale binding, so what's the difference? Says the Gemara, I'll tell you the difference. But someone who gives money for land, Charifa at an earlier price, he gives 2 or 3 to the seller. Then he says, I thought I was on something better, and you took it. And Amar Ravashi, Asha Amre Misham, Mismach Adaita, Afilu Shok of Amle Samach Daita, the whole Vart is on a Smichas Das, says Ravashi, can even have that earlier on. And we're going to conclude today's share with 3 dinim of Rav Nachman. Amar Rav Nachman, about 20 lines to the bottom of the 2 dots. Klala de Rabisa. What is the klal of ribis? Kol agar notale aser. The klal of ribis is any agar notarle. If you're paying wages to wait for an item, that is forbidden. Which is in English the reason if I lend you $1 million and you have to give me back 1.2, that's called agar notarle. It's called I'm getting money for the time. That's forbidden. Number 2. If someone gave money to a wax merchant and the wax goes for 4 perzos, and he says to him, I'll give you, hey, it's nayu gabe, shari las nayu gabe aser. If he has the item, then it's mutter. If he doesn't, it's aser. Says Mar Pshita, lo shricha, you know what the chiddush is? Tislei ashare b'masa. The chiddush is that he has some orders in a neighboring town. It's considered a ki'ilu. He has it, just the child Evan has to bring it, and it should be fine. No. The fact that you have something elsewhere, but you cannot collect it, it's mechaser gavina, that makes it command. It's if it's not around, therefore you cannot act upon it. And therefore, you're not be able to utilize that to get out of any shilas of ribis.